Good morning. So welcome to Go Sourcing third Monday webinar. Just a bit of introduction. Go Sourcing is a social media website for procurement leaders and supply chain professionals like you guys. What we do, we provide you with the relevant resources, news, tools that you need to succeed at work. So for today, we're going to discuss more about suppliers' performance management. And as you can see from our website, one of the recent research by MIT showing that about 77% of companies that is surveyed said that 2 out of the top 3 procurement risk factors were related to suppliers. So that's what we're going to focus for today. And most people that they survey, this MIT researchers survey, they felt that most of the suppliers' risks are the top 2 priority one are over-dependency on suppliers and quality issues on suppliers. We are very privileged to have a very unique discussion for today. What we have here today is Edward. You can see it on the screen. Edward, you want to wave your hand? That's Edward. And Colin. Colin is the one on the purple shirt. So that's Colin. And we'll start off with a panel discussion between these 2 gentlemen. And then after that, we'll follow with a quick demo and a case study by George. George, you want to say hi? Yeah, so George will give a 10 minutes presentation on the software tool for supplier performance management. So for the first session of panel discussion, we're going to have a very interesting discussion because this format, we're going to talk about from buyers and suppliers perspective. What we felt is a lot of time when we deal with supplier performance management or supply chain performance to be specific, sometimes it's not just about the responsibility or what the suppliers can do. And a lot of times it's more about what the buyers and suppliers can do together. And that's why we come up with the panel discussion for today, where we're going to interview both Edward and Colin, where Edward, in this case, he's going to represent the buyers based on his experience on what buyers think about suppliers' performance. And Colin is going to play the role as a supplier and going to share with you his vast experience on the supplier's perspective. So I believe we're going to have a very interesting session today, looking from the both sides, both perspective of buyers and perspective of suppliers, with the common goal, which is to improve suppliers' performance or supply chain performance. Without further ado, let me start the discussion going by a bit of background for Edward. So Edward Rayner is actually a procurement consultant for Spotless Group in Australia. His background includes the head of training for the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply, CIPS in short. He's also the previous director of Worley Parsons Supply Hub in China and a senior advisor to the UAE University of Abu Dhabi, holding the Certified Professional in Supply Management and also a postgraduate management qualification. Edward is often called upon to bring simplicity and direction to complex procurement challenges as he worked both in Chinese, Mandarin, and English. That's very impressive, Edward. You can speak in 3 languages, Chinese, Mandarin, English. That pretty much covers the majority language of the world, basically. And yeah, and then we have Colin. So Colin started his career as an expeditor in Aberdeen after graduating in business studies in university. He progressed as a buyer working at Shell through the procurement managers at Schlumberger within 4 years. And during this time, he also received an award from Schlumberger CPO, gained MSIPS accreditation, and started teaching the same qualification at Aberdeen College. Then he diversified his working experience in smaller organizations, implementing many change management projects, including complete centralization of procurement function and reducing process costs, resulting in significant saving and control of spend. Well, that's a very impressive track of record, Colin. And maybe you can tell us a bit more about what you have done throughout the interview as well. All right. So without further ado, I'm quite interested to hear from this very experienced gentleman. And personally, I think I will learn a lot from you guys as well. So, well, to start the ball rolling, right? I mean, maybe let's get the definition right of supplier performance. Supplier performance. What is supplier performance? And I think just to clear things up, I think a lot of companies, whether it's suppliers or buyers, they think that supplier performance is just about on-time delivery or deliver on time. And though there's nothing wrong with it, I think, but what I always feel that this perception is missing out something. So I don't know. I mean, Edward, from the buyer's perspective, if a buyer company that is focusing just on suppliers' performance as an indicator or as a key matrix to improve their performance, what are they missing out?
That's a fair question. I'm a big believer that as a buyer, your first responsibility is to your organization's customers or clients or end users. So whatever you're looking at from your supplier performance data, your measurement, what you need from them, you've got to bear that in mind as what do your customers expect from your suppliers. And with that in mind, I always look to widen the net of what I'm capturing so that we can start looking at innovation, we can start looking at true collaboration, we can start looking at risk mitigation, risk prediction, and to actually get meaningful data, meaningful information, meaningful solid facts, so that when you do your next sourcing project, you've got wider knowledge of how you as an organization work and also what your customers actually want from you and your suppliers. So very much I keep in mind what it is that customers want. They want to know that the products they buy from you are safe, that there's low risk, that you're ahead of the curve, and that you're doing everything that you can to reduce your own true cost of your supply chain.
Yeah. So I guess what your point is saying is like start from the requirement, understanding from what we want to buy, what is the business objectives, right? Start from the objectives, right? The goals,
and and that takes you then away, as I was talking with Colin earlier, from that traditional command control environment where it's just you shouting at the supplier, which nobody wants.
Okay, that's very interesting. Well, how about Colin? I think from the supplier's perspective, they are kind of like the providers, right? Do suppliers company usually define suppliers' performance differently than how buyers did it? Well, how do they usually define suppliers' performance in terms of internally?
Edward kind of alluded to the fact that the power is with the buyer. So most of the time in industry, the buyer pushes whatever KPIs the buyer decides, what is relevant for the scope, onto the supplier. It should happen, but it's very rare there's collaboration between the supplier and the buyer to come up with metrics that is agreed for future performance and working together. What basically is everyone wants the same thing. The buyer wants the supplier to perform, and the supplier wants to perform. The better the supplier performs, the more chance they'll get the contract extended and so on. So it's trying to move away from this adversarial, you will do this kind of perspective. You will have 95% delivery KPIs. If you don't achieve 95%, you will be penalized, for example. So it's trying to get away from that. It's changing the whole culture and the mentality, but it's two ways, not just pushing on to the buyer, the supplier.
Right. So you don't want to seem being perceived by the buyer as in like you're just pushing product, or you are just like keeps selling product and pushing what they don't want, something like that. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, just do what you're told. It's human nature. No grown adult likes to be told what to do.
Right. I guess it's just like the old saying, people doesn't like to be sold, right?
Yeah. People like to be influenced. People like to be bought into things that they see value and benefit for themselves. Nobody likes to be told, right, do this or else. When that happens, it just creates distance between the buyer and supplier. However, in some cases, it does actually work. You might have a working industry where it is quite adversarial. You might have suppliers where there's plenty of suppliers out there, in which case it could be beneficial if you do adopt you will do the old mentality. But in long-term relationships for critical supplies and services, that's the way to go.
Okay. Very interesting perspective, Colin. Before we proceed, for all audience, especially for those who just joined, can you please mute your phone if you're calling from the phone? If you're calling from the internet, just click on the phone icon on your top left corner and mute on the microphone so that we have a pleasant experience throughout the webinar. Thank you. All right. So, Colin, thanks for the interesting perspective. So, at least now we can see a very balanced perspective in terms of how buyers define supplier performance, and in terms of from the supplier's perspective, even though there are different metrics, but I think at the end of the day, it's a very collaborative relationship. A good supplier's matrix in terms of supplier performance is still about try to understand what the buyers want. And from the buyer's perspective, it's more about try to understand what we want to buy. What is a key goal before purchasing? That's what I learned from you guys from our first question. Now, I think this is more for the buyer. So that will be a question for you, Edward. And now, I mean, recently, I guess in the recent years, a lot of companies across the industry has been becoming very dependent to suppliers, and to the extent that sometimes the buyers are afraid of, they might be even afraid of losing suppliers or getting too dependent to their suppliers or even vendor lock-in. So based on your experience, right? So there are a lot of suppliers risk. And how do usually buyers manage this risk? I mean, maybe you can share with us maybe 5 best practices on that you can recommend buyers company on mitigating business risk associated to suppliers.
Of course, I mean, with the last 20 or so years, the rush for outsourcing, the rush to, I can't stand the phrase, for companies to stick to their knitting, automation, offshoring, all these things have ended up with companies doing less than and relying on outsourced partners, and thus becoming more dependent, which can be healthy, but it sometimes isn't necessarily healthy. And if you're reliant on one supplier, and that's the only supplier in the world that can possibly perform whatever task or service or good for you, then it's not necessarily a great place to be, and you need to.
I don't want to be that place.
Yeah, no, it's never good. Something I found quite successful is just running scenario testing, taking out your main suppliers, be it measure them by volume, by value, by strategic inputs, and asking ourselves, if this company went broke tomorrow, what would actually happen, and do a full scenario testing. Gather everyone in the room who touches the inputs of that supplier, and ask yourself 3 key questions. How long will it be until our ability to service our customers is affected? Always go back to the customer. So if this company, if this supplier goes broke tomorrow, how long have we got before our customers are impacted? What are the alternative supplies available, both in-house and outsourcing? Go back to your make or buy. And how long will it take to mobilize alternative supplies? And the answers to those 3 questions, will work them through, will give you the cost to your business of what happens if that supplier, whether it goes broke tomorrow or whether the relationship breaks down. And from then you can start putting in place mitigation and circumstances. So yeah, whilst you ask for 5, the key thing is you've got to run the scenario testing. Right. You've got to also review if the element that supplier is providing you is actually critical for your ability to deliver. If it is, then you've got a true strategic relationship with this supplier, so treat it as that. Don't treat it, as I mentioned before, like command control. This supplier is now on equal footing with your business as your employees, and treat them within that type of relationship. You design contracts that run back to back with your suppliers. So if your customers have got key abatements, key penalties, Colin mentioned earlier, key measures, I'm talking about supplier measurements, run those measurements, run those KPIs down to your suppliers, involve them in your success. And the last one, which I often think is mostly overlooked, is actually having an independent viewpoint on your supplier relationship committee. Ideally, if the supplier is so critical to you, you're going to be meeting with them regularly, you're going to have a structured supplier relationship management forum. Bring in the chair of that to be an independent person, someone who can look at it objectively and can very quickly get towards what the truth of the position is, away from the agenda of either side. You need to have that purely objective part that an independent chair can offer. So I quickly went through 5 there. Thomas, I'm sure you'll provide our colleagues the scenarios afterwards, but go scenario testing, independent chair.
Yeah, I guess what I get from what I learned from this is like, well, risk, there's always risk, but scenario planning kind of like help you to envision, right? At least you think through it before it happens. So ask yourself like 3 key questions. Like I like that 3 key questions. For example, like how long can the company survive or serve the customers if the suppliers is I mean, we face suppliers risk. And second is what are the alternatives available, and also then how long to rectify the problem. I guess that's the 3 key questions that will help in terms of scenario planning, right?
And unfortunately, Thomas, the answer to all of those 3 questions will always involve spending money up front or things going wrong. Whether that's investing in an alternative supply, giving them some part of your business, whether that's building capability, whatever it is, you will have to, to do this honestly, you will have to spend money ahead of them going out of business for you.
Yep. Well, in that sense, that's why I would think that people like you as a procurement consultant, you bring additional insights. You eventually you try to bring together things that try to work together to predict things on before it happens. So that kind of help. But let me give you a tougher question. I guess supplies risk is one thing, but now if you're talking about global supplier network, I think that makes things a lot even more complicated. And face it, I mean, with China coming out and a lot of Asian countries, economics developing, nowadays there are a lot more options in terms of suppliers. And some people see it as a good thing, we have more options. But I think personally, through my experience, I think managing global supplier network is not an easy fit as well. It's quite challenging to track their performance. So I don't know, through your experience, how do you track these multiple suppliers, global suppliers network, and how do you translate like different supplier performance in terms of business role and things like that? Maybe you can share some ideas or even case studies.
It's the devil of the detail, this question, Thomas. It's the it's where organizations succeed or fail or just stumble along. To answer this question, I'm suggesting just a very simple business process. We all know we've got to get the key stakeholders in the room. Once you've got them in a forum, you establish the base. You've got to get the starting point of what the truth of the situation currently is. You've got to establish that base. You've got to remove the anecdotes, and you've got to head down the data and find and identify data that can be repeated. Because we want to improve, and you've got to measure improvement. If the data can't be repeated or the measurement, then ignore it. Once you've got those base truth points, you've established the base, you need to discuss and debate the facts. Again, 3 questions. What is the impact of this fact on our customers? What's the direction of the trend? And what's the prediction of the risk? So establish the base, discuss the facts, and then as a group, make the decision. You focus on each decision being a change of action, not intent. Right. Ensure it can be measured. Ensure that decisions aren't commands, that everyone involved, including the supplier, has been part of the discussion and it's not presented as a command. And then you've got to move on. You've got to trust the people who have been part of that decision. Right. So whilst our colleague out of Vienna this morning will talk more about how to view data, how to construct the data, my key lesson and the thing which I bring to my groups I work with is the data true? Can it be repeated? If it can't be repeated, we don't refer to it. So that's my very simple approach to this very, very tricky problem, Thomas. It is one every organization struggles with. Anytime you've got multiple sites, you're in strife. And if I could make one final point, it doesn't have to be global. I've just finished a piece of work with an organization with 8 sites within 20 kilometers of each other, and they have the same issues as Worley Parsons, which was a large global engineering firm, had, just on a smaller scale, same issues.
Okay. Well, it's a good general framework, but I know, like you said, the key levels is in the details. But let me leave out the details to the audience, right? Later on, to our audience, at the last 20 to 25 minutes of this webinar, we're going to have a Q&A session. So I guess that is the best time where you can share your company problems directly to Edward in terms of what he's saying and how does he apply his framework to that particular issues. Now, come back to our discussion. Something that I'm more interested is on the supplier side. So, Colin, this will be more for your question, right? So, in terms of supplier performance, right? So, like what Edward mentioned, a lot of times the buyers always try to manage a supplier's risk. That's a key case, and it seems that a lot of times suppliers are putting into a pressure on okay, how to manage the supplier's risk, how to improve their performance. It seems that the pressure is always onto the supplier's end, but there are a lot of things that buyers can do. But what I always believe in a collaborative relationship is always going both ways. So buyers doing their part to improve the performance, but at the same time, suppliers can do their own part as well. And one of the things I often hear from suppliers is like, they often say, well, we are trying to improve it, but there is no channel for us to give feedback to the buyers. I mean, the buyers only call us when there's issues. And other than that, they never talk to us. Do you see like this is a common scenario among suppliers?
You're correct, Thomas. This is a very common problem with suppliers. You hit the nail on the head. A lot of buying organisations, suppliers don't hear about until something goes wrong. When I was doing my lecturing in Aberdeen College, my tutor at the time told me a story about what's called the drain theory. The idea is nobody actually knows where the drains in the road are unless it's raining and there's something wrong with the drains, so the water doesn't actually go down. So that story is actually stuck in my mind, and it's very relevant here. People could forget who even their suppliers are, what value they bring to the organisation when things are going well, until something actually goes wrong. And then they pick up the phone or write an email to the supplier, hey, Mr. Supplier, what's going on here? And that puts a supplier right back into defensive mode. I've heard the storyline often you could do 99% of the things correct, but the buyer will always remember that one thing that you've actually done wrong. And everyone's human, everyone makes mistakes. So I think in a lot of cases it is actually unfair to the supplier. But all this could actually be prevented by open communication, very transparent what the objectives of the supplier is. Ask the supplier what they're buying to this. But yes, I was just at a meeting last week speaking to a company, and they were saying they've got exactly had that problem, trying to get feedback from one of their clients, their vendor rating that they're scoring. They've sent out the questionnaire multiple times and they haven't got anything back. So they don't know how well they're actually doing. And for you to actually, it's old and do check act. So if you're doing and you've got nothing back, how do you know how well they're actually performing? And it's very easy to go into this hole, which is a dangerous hole, to assume everything's fine. So it's comfortable. Okay, we haven't had anything back. Back to the phrase, no news is good news. It's a popular phrase in the UK. So you just carry on what you're doing. But what happens if what you're doing is actually impacting on your client, but your client's not coming back to tell you? And that happens a lot. It sounds crazy. It happens a lot. The supplier's not performing, but the buying organisation isn't even going back to the supplier to tell them what impact it is they're having. So if they don't know what they're doing, they'll just keep on doing it.
Yeah.
So that happens a lot until it gets to the point where the amount of failures start to build up until there's a big impact. And then there's a big impact, the relationship, that's it.
So I guess the key takeaway that I learned, what I get from you is like the suppliers should take a proactive role to provide feedback to the buyers, right? Don't assume that if they didn't call back or anything, then everything is good. Try to take a proactive role in improving the relationship. Try to provide insights on potential issues and potential risks and things like that. Am I right on that?
I agree, but I think up to a point, no matter how proactive you are, if the door isn't open, you wouldn't be able to speak to them. And it doesn't even reply to emails, reply to phone calls. The door is closed. So what they do after that, I don't know. It is very frustrating from my suppliers a lot of the time.
Okay. Well, I think that's a very useful insight, because I think we have most of our audience here today are buyers, and I think by human nature, right? Sometimes we are self-centric. We don't know what others think, what others has been thinking, and then what you're sharing with all of us today, Colin. I think at least all the buyers, they have an interest on improving the relationship, improving the supply performance, and through your sharing, they know like now what suppliers been thinking, right? So at least they know that, okay, for suppliers who are keen to improve performance, I mean, on the buyer side, at least they need to open up their door. They need to provide certain channels to providing feedback, and just as simple as like have a weekly review meeting or monthly communication through emails, that will help a lot, right? Instead of like waiting until the issues happen, then starting blame each other. Okay. Well, that comes up to the third point, because sometimes they felt that usually when it first started, the relationship all is good. Buyers are happy with the suppliers, that they sign a contract, 1-year contract, until something happens where now they kind of like suspect each other. They kind of like suspect that, okay, is the buyers trying to take advantage of me, or from the buyer's perspective, it's like, okay, is the supplier is trying to take advantage of me, and that's where the trust issue come in. And since you're with me at the moment, right? Maybe you can share with me on the supplier's perspective, what could be the most the 3 worst buyers' behavior. So at least what the audience, among the audience who are buyers, they can understand they should avoid doing these things to the suppliers that will cause distrust. So what are the 3 worst buyers' behavior that would damage the relationship and trust?
Well, I think, Thomas, before I answer that question, what I like to see is there isn't that much difference between personal relationships and business relationships. Some people are able to switch on and switch off. The problem there is it takes a lot of energy to change being from one person to another. Like you alluded to before, just like personal relationships and business relationships, it could take years and years and years to build up that trust, and it just could take a few days for it to come crashing down again. So from that, to me, the worst behavior is simply when a supplier says that they'll do something and they don't actually do it, and in turn it's the same with the buyer. If the buyer comes to you and says to you, "Yes, Mr. Supplier, we're going to buy 1 million of your units over 12 months in return for heavy discounts," but that buyer knows that what their demand is, it's not even half of that. Another one is invoices. "Yes, Mr. Supplier, we'll pay your invoice tomorrow, but we will deliver our goods today, and we'll pay your invoice tomorrow." So the goods are delivered, but no payment of invoices.
Right.
So, and that's actually a very deep personal emotion. When somebody say, it sounds simple, But when somebody says they will do something and don't do it, that already creates that suspicion. Yes, accidents happen. People do things unintentionally, but if that does happen, communicate with the supplier. Even apologise. Say, okay, this happened. This is why it happened, and this is what we are going to do to prevent the same thing happening again. The other one that I think it ruins trust and reputation is the buyer having the big mentality of, I've got the purchase order, I will give you the purchase order, I've got the power, you're only the supplier. And I've seen that mentality even now, and people are treating all suppliers in exactly the same way. And when that happens, no wonder that supplier gets frustrated because they're not feeling respected. So what they then do is give their products and services to another company that they do feel valued with. So to me, what I'm trying to say here is, no matter what it is you're buying, there should always be a certain professional level that you
truthful, I guess.
Truthful, courteous, transparent. Because like I said, they're all human. Nobody likes to be treated disrespectfully at the end of the day. But that's all. These two things are very much what you shouldn't do. And what you can do is just making people feel appreciated, even just a thank you. It's free, but it can go so far. One of the good examples I saw this week in practice, when you want to treat your supplier well, is simple things like payment terms. A UK company this week has promised for smaller suppliers that they will get paid within 7 days.
Well, I guess payment terms is always a big. Well, I guess payment, even though it's just a big payment, small payment, but anything that went wrong to the payment could always create a dent in the trust, right? I mean, when you promise something, you need to deliver. But let's have a mutual understanding, because I think that would be a good perspective to let the buyers know how suppliers think on what they shouldn't do to affect the relationship. Now, Edward, how about on the buyer side? I'm sure buyers always have a list as well, like what you as a supplier, like Mr. Suppliers, we appreciate your relationship, but these are the 3 key areas that you should have stepped into. Otherwise, our relationship is gone, right? So what are the 3 worst things good suppliers can do?
Indeed, and these 3 things which I'm going to list happen more often when you've got poor buyer behaviour. And what Colin said, I can only agree with 10 times. It's often the bad behaviour just starts on the buyer side. The 3 things which my experience with suppliers do to damage a relationship is not alerting the buyers when they can see a problem in advance. And sometimes that's because of fear, sometimes because they've got the message that it's their job to solve it, but still tell the buyers that we think there's a problem coming up and how can we work on this together. Trying to cover up the problem and then the problem emerging is a nightmare for everyone concerned. So let us know there's a problem in advance. Not listening. Yes, we understand that as suppliers, you're experts in your field. You should be experts in your field. This is why we have you. But take the time to listen to the impact that your good or service has on the buyer's customers. Been a theme I've been talking about all evening. Listen to how your good or service is used within the organization. Ask what happens to it once it enters your machine? What happens to it once it enters your world? And the last one is when suppliers rely on, again, your assumptions to view and analyze the relationship. Too often, suppliers, you're busy people. You've got sales targets to meet. You've got other customers to serve. You assume that we're like your other customers. And yes, there are things which can link, but sometimes there are things which are different, which is why we've hired you. So just to summarize, tell us there's a problem, listen to what happens to your good or service when it enters our world, and don't assume, ask. And if you can do those three things, then you build in, as Colin said earlier, trust can be built in and it can become a very useful relationship.
Yep. Well, that kind of reinforces what Colin said at the beginning. There is no difference in between personal and business relationship. Trust is always people trust, right? So even like between me and my wife, when things going bad, something goes wrong, I need to tell her in first hand rather than she find out later on. I think that is a good analogy. Okay, well, we are almost end of the session, so let me wrap this up by the last question. So, well, Edward, well, on the buyer side, maybe you can tell us maybe 4 or 5 key takeaways, like for the audience, right? On the buyer side, what is the best way for them to improve supplier performance? The key is in a sustainable manner, not just a one-off thing, right? So yeah, maybe just keep it short. More questions can be asked later on, but keep it short, like 5 items.
Yeah, correct. First one, list and cost all your assumptions. As deep as you can go. If something's an assumption, write it down and cost it. You've got to invest in Plan B. You've got to have Plan B ready to roll. You've also got to trust your supplier to be part of your team. You're the one who's asked them to supply you. If you don't trust them, then you've got to work on working out where the relationship's gone wrong. Bring in an independent party for key strategic items, someone to act as an independent eye on what you're doing, someone who doesn't have an agenda of either party, but can just help you both parties find the points of truth. And lastly, visit your suppliers more than they visit you. Ask them, how are you as a customer? How easy is it to sell to? What problems do we have? What can we do to make it better? And you'll only get that true honesty if you visit them. If they're sitting in your meeting room, it's a different field. You've got to go and visit them more than they visit you, or phone them if it's not practical. There's my 5 quick tips.
Well, excellent. Well, Colin, how about on your end, representing the suppliers? Well, what are the key takeaways that you can share among all the suppliers so that they can improve?
In summary, with the 3 things I've just mentioned, do what you say you're going to do. 100%. Respect the other party. And just be appreciative of what the supplier is doing. Yes, it's reciprocal. You're given a service, you expect to be paid for it. So that's my very condensed answer to yourself, Thomas. Do what you say, respect each other, and appreciate each other.
Okay. All right. Thanks, you guys. Just hang on there. I think there are going to be questions from the audience regarding what we discussed just now, especially to Edward and Colin. Okay, so let's move on to the next session. So, George, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still there. Hi.
Okay, thanks for waiting. So, yeah, so now we're already done with the panel discussion. So we know about the best practices on what buyers and suppliers can do in terms of improving suppliers' performance. And I think what you're going to share with us is more on the tools, right? The tools and the technologies and some of the innovation that can support these best practices. I think the audience will be very keen to see what your company can do, right? So just a brief introduction. George is the head of product management from a company called Proof4Tool. He's actually the solution specialist since 2013. Together with his team, he has actually worked developing the substance and the quality of the software solution. George's main profession is actually in the suppliers management processes, and that's why we invited him to share his knowledge for today's session, including procurement projects at the market leaders from the manufacturing industry, such as Mann & Hummel and other big companies. And prior to his career at Proof4Tools, George studied media informatics in Technical University of Vienna, where he also worked with a research assistant in Institute of Software Engineering and in IBM Learning Services as well. So, George, you're kind of like a technical person, I would say, your background.
That's where I started, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, so good. So I guess I'll pass the stage to you in a few seconds. So show them the tools, show them the magic that how the latest technology from Pool for Tool can help them in terms of suppliers performance management. All right. So let me pass you the presenter's role, then you can share your screen.
Okay, perfect. Good. So, so hi from my side. My name is George. I'm from Pool for Tool, and I would like to tell you a little bit about what we heard in the discussion before of how this can be done in a software solution. Just to show this to you, just from the beginning. So what I did here is how is the process actually? How does it look like? So what I did is I mapped down some roles. So there can be a lead buyer, purchasing, logistics, quality, suppliers, and so on. And on the top of everything, I have my ERP system where I get all my data. I mean, this is, Edward, what you basically said, put in whatever you can measure somehow. Yeah? And so in the beginning, what you should do is you should define what is your rating model, okay? So for me, it does not make any sense to have like one rating model for all of your organization because you have so many different types of suppliers. Yeah, so for each category, this has to be adapted somehow, or for each type of supplier. Because if you have like a distributor, completely different things are relevant than for a producing company. Like R&D is for a distributor not so important as for another one. So the next thing when you define this is to actually do the rating, and the process should be very, very simple. Okay, so you want to start a rating, pick a supplier, and now the system should do everything for you. So it should get all the data from your ERP. Yeah? So calculate all the hard facts. We were talking about on-time delivery, but there's also quality-related data, PPM rates, you name it. Yeah? But what you should also do is, because to be honest, a lot of companies cannot really work just with hard facts because they know that the data that they really have is not really that good. So they have to ask all the stakeholders inside their company to answer some questions. And then when you have all of this together, then you have a rating with hard and soft facts, meaning having data from the ERP as well as opinions from all the stakeholders in your organization. This should give you the complete picture. Okay, then this should be analyzed. Of course, you should share this with your supplier. This is very, very important, and you should share it on a very, very detailed level. Okay, so just telling you your quality is 80% means like nothing. What does 80% mean? Is it good? Is it bad? What's your expectation? And why is it 80% and not 100%? So you have to give the supplier very, very detailed information about where the problems are. And this is where you should then have a discussion with the supplier. And then if you want to develop your suppliers, and I'm talking here about my strategic suppliers, you should define the measures. Okay, so what is necessary from your point of view or from the supplier's point of view, how he can increase his performance. Okay, this is exactly what you should do. And then those measures should be executed. They should be tracked in the system. Everybody should be on the same page. So this is what we're going to do. These are the deadlines. What's the current status? Okay, and this can be supported by a tool, of course. Okay, so what I put in here is one example of how this can be done. Okay, so here to the left-hand side, you see this tree kind of view. This is actually a real-world example of one of our clients, where you can see the different dimensions that they rate the suppliers. Okay, so they have quality data, like I said before, PPM rate and so on. Costs, of course, cost is very important to measure. Logistics information, how good is the development of the supplier, how good is innovation. So I was really happy, Edward, that you mentioned innovation there. And also company information. So this is more like the soft facts. So how good is the support of the back office, how good is the support of the field service, and so on. But all in all, these things matter, okay? And then you have here a screen where you can see, okay, what's the current status? You can see already some results of the suppliers. This is like the highest level. This is the overall result that you see here per supplier. But of course, you can drill down, okay? So you can drill down into quality. You can drill down into product quality PPM rate, but this is not the end, okay? When you see this supplier has a PPM rate of like, I don't know, 150, okay? Then you want to drill down further. So you want to see, okay, how many deliveries were there? How many complaints did they have with this supplier? What's the status of this complaint? Does the supplier see the same thing, or does it say, no, that wasn't my fault, it was actually the logistics service provider who dropped something or whatever, okay? So as I said, it's very important to have this data on a very, very detailed level. But for me, this is only like the beginning of what you should do. Of course, this is necessary. This is for most companies do this for their annual talks with their suppliers. Okay, that they have this result and they can look at it and can talk about it with their suppliers. But for me, actually, this is not enough. Okay, so when I'm thinking about sourcing, okay, so let's say you're doing an RFQ. Okay, what's the goal is cost transparency, right? So you really want to know the cost structure of your suppliers. I mean, I have to say or Pulver2 is very much into direct procurement, so products that go into manufacturing and so on, where you have drawings and everything. So you really want to know the cost structure of your suppliers. And this is like the current version of how a lot of companies are doing this, okay? So at first you have your supplier selections, who are the relevant suppliers, and then you are making an RFQ, and then you get some price constraints, you get some overhead costs, production costs, material costs, and you get this this cost breakdown, which should give you the TCO. Okay, so this is the classic, I don't know, 1980s approach of doing this, to get all of this data from your suppliers. But in reality, this gives you not the correct picture, because what you need is you need way more information to come to the TBO, so the total value of ownership. And in order to do that, you need to see how is the supplier connected, okay? So does he send every invoice via paper, which is cost on your end? Does he send you the order confirmation via paper? Then somebody has to enter it manually. That's cost on your end, how good was the performance of the supplier, okay? How good is the potential of this supplier? So does he have all the certifications that are needed, and so on and so on? And this is very important, what's your strategy here? What's your strategy in this category, and what's your specific strategy in with this supplier? Is this a supplier that you want to phase out, that you want to increase some spend there, and so on? So this is very important. And why is this important? I don't know. We check this data from our clients, and I have to say we have more than 300 clients in the direct procurement space. And this is what we found out. We found out that the price that you get from your supplier is only like 2/3 of the actual cost that you will have. Okay, and over a 12-month period, you should think about the other costs. So what about quality? So if the quality is bad, you need to increase incoming goods checks, okay, which costs a lot of money. What about the supply chain costs that you have? What about the process costs that you have with the supplier? And of course, what are the risks? Okay, so there are studies that you can say every 2 years you will face a major breakdown from one of your suppliers. Okay, and this is some risks that you have to calculate in. And what we actually did here, or what some clients of us are doing, is they integrate all this data into their supplier comparison. So in an RFQ, when they get back the quotes from their suppliers, they include all of this data that is already there in the system. So let me show you one example here. Just take a look at, so there's one item in this RFQ, which is 28 euros per piece or 31 euros per piece for 2 different suppliers. And here in the gray box that you see, we have all the cost details of the supplier. So this is classic TCO information that you get here. Okay, so you know exactly what it will cost, how the cost is structured, and so on. But if you factor in some other information, so what's the risk score of a supplier? So what's your supplier rating? So how good was this supplier in the past for you? What about sustainability information, supplier potential, and so on? And if you factor all of this in, the picture looks completely different. That you can now see that your actual cost for this supplier is 37 euros, while this one is 34 euros. So the picture changed completely. So this is basically our approach here, is to include as much data as you have as early as possible, because this will create sustainable decisions. And this is also very good for the suppliers, in my opinion, because you can tell your suppliers, well, you're such a good supplier, I'm willing to pay 3% more, and you will still be the winner, because you have such great performance. And I think this is exactly the way to go. And if you have a cheap supplier, you can tell him, okay, I know that your performance is not good, or I know that these are my additional costs, so you have to be cheaper than the other one where I have very good good information. So this is the clearest picture you might get, and I think this is the most important information, one can get here. That's basically it, Thomas. So it was just a rough overview, or a quick overview of what should be possible. All right.
Okay. Well, very interesting. So before I open up the floor, so for the rest of the audience, we still have about 10 to 15 minutes for our question and answer session. So right now, try to unmute your mic if you have muted it previously. Just click on the phone icon again and click on the microphone icon to unmute it. If you're calling from the phone, then just unmute your mobile phone, and then you can ask the question by just quickly introduce your name, which speakers that you want to address to, then you can straight ask your question. So just unmute your microphone right now. So George, thanks a lot for the great sharing. I know there are a lot of things that you still want to share. I know about Pool42. You guys provide a great tool, a very holistic tool that cover all angles, and I think that is just the tip of the iceberg, if I'm correct, right? Yeah. So yeah. So I leave it to the details, because I think if the audience has specific questions, I have a few questions from our offline audience as well. So I will put it to you later on. I mean, if we don't have any audience, live audience asking questions. So for now, for our live audience that's still with us, if you have any questions, unmute your microphone, introduce yourself by saying your name, which company you're from, then you can just go ahead and ask your questions. Anyone? Anyone? Hello? You're trying to say something? Okay, so it's muted. Anyway, just unmute your microphone if you still have any question. Otherwise, I'll take one question from our offline audience. This question is mainly for George. Is one of he didn't mention his company, but he's based in Thailand. He says that what are the KPIs that in terms of contract management? How does your tools reflect contracts of suppliers and tie it to different suppliers' performance and supplier segmentation? Are your tools able to provide the KPI of the contracts that link, the KPI of the suppliers that link back to the contracts? So that's the question for you, George.
Yes, of course. I mean, there are different types of contracts, of course, but I mean, you named it before. You have like payment terms, input terms. You have specific, I don't know, bonus contracts, and so on and so on. And of course, as soon as you have all of this kind of data, it becomes measurable. Okay, so Pool42 doesn't give you. You have those 10 KPIs. Choose from them. Okay. Pool42 works in a way that gives us the data, and we can calculate whatever KPI you have. So Pool42 is not really limited to a set of KPIs. Of course, there are like industry standards that almost everybody is using, like on-time delivery, PPM rate, quantity adherence, and so on and so on. Yeah? All of this stuff is of course in there, but we're not limited to any number of KPIs.
Okay. All right. So I hope these are offline audience. So later on, we will have a recorded webinar where we will send to this audience. They will hear from your answers. Then they'll probably get in touch with you if they have more questions. So, well, before I pull up the next question from the offline envelopes, any questions from our live audience? So for all the audience, just say hi if you want to ask any questions. Then you can proceed with asking the questions. Anybody? Oh, we have a very quiet group today. Okay, well, let me ask the next question. This is more for Colin and Edward. So, well, I think this is more towards Edward actually. So one of the guy, this guy is actually a buyer. He just put his name, James. He's actually a senior buyer, again from a local company in Malaysia. He says that why do we need feedback from the suppliers? Will they not be biased? So I guess it's referring on why we need to get feedback from suppliers. I mean, will their feedback biased towards what the product they're offering and things like that? So maybe I can ask towards Edward first. So how can you answer this guy? Why do we need feedback from suppliers? Will they not be biased? What do you think, Edward?
Indeed, I think we need feedback from suppliers because they are biased, because they do see the relationship, they do see things from their point of view. You need to know what they're thinking. You need to know what their pressures are. You need to know what's worrying them. And yes, they will be biased. Doesn't mean that you're asking them to make the decision. And where the decision is made is one about power relationship, which Colin referred to earlier. So my first comment was also, it's not necessarily a command and control relationship. If you do not know what your supplier is thinking, feeling, worrying about, hopeful about, what they think of you, then you're running in the dark. And when you come to a negotiation, you have no information about what they think of you. And that puts you in a very, very weak position. So it is still self-serving asking them, but it's actually giving you more authority, more influence in negotiations. And you might even solve a couple of problems as well. You never know.
Okay. How about you, Colin? I mean, from the supplier's perspective, I guess first question is does all suppliers' feedback is biased when they provide feedback to buyers, and how would suppliers improve themselves so that their feedback doesn't perceive bias and more truthful? Your input, Colin.
I think it's very common where good salespeople tell the buyer what they want to hear. There's been for example, an evaluation survey from the feedback. If the supplier wants to keep the client happy, if they want to keep the work, it's very common that they'll say, yes, everything's fine, no problems at all, where they don't want to actually tell the truth to the buying organisation in fear of getting on the wrong side of them. But the damage there is, over the long term, the little problems which weren't communicated at the outset build up and build up and build up until eventually the point where it's unretrievable. So I think it's back to the transparency, open communication, and just basically being honest. If there are problems, tell the buyer what the problems are, rather than getting a biased viewpoint on it. So,
no worries.
And perhaps just while you get that, you also, as a procurement professional, you're not involved with every interaction that happens between your organisation and the supplier, especially if you're multi-site or you're global. Outside your own office, you've got limited visibility. This is a way to see how your organisation is actually working with the contracts that you've put a lot of effort into setting up.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, we have a question from our live audience. He just typed it in the chat box. His name is Cedric. So he says, this is a question for Edward. Edward, you might saw it on the box. He says, any advice to engage a client towards procurement services project as a consultant? So I guess it's more asking you as a colleague consultant on how to get advice based on like your experience as a consultant. How do you engage the customers to hire you, I guess?
So you mean from a consulting side, how do I best engage a customer, or how should the customer engage the consultant? So I'm a bit confused as to which angle.
Well, when I read the question, I mean, Cedric, I mean, feel free to chip in if you can talk. Otherwise,
okay.
Okay.
I'll answer this simply because this could be another seminar in itself. It's one of honesty, transparency. They're asking you for help because they don't know, because they need you. Your job is to push them. Your job is to bring things up that they haven't thought about, not tell them just what they want to hear. Your job is to be as honest as you can, because if they choose to hire you, you become part of their family, and it's imperative that they know what they're expecting, because that brings out the more successful projects. So themes of honesty, transparency, don't just tell them what they want to hear, and most importantly, if you cannot do it, say, I can't do it.
Okay, that's good advice. Colin, you yourself is a procurement consultant as well, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just that in this seminar you are representing the suppliers, but share with us your professional as a procurement consultant, the same question that Cedric is asking.
I totally agree with Edward 100%. If you're not honest at the start, sooner or later, you're going to get found out. And if you are found out, that potentially could be your reputation, because as a consultant, you're only as good as your last job. In Aberdeen and Scotland, it's not a big place, so your reputation you've got to carry with you. Sometimes it's good just to say, look, I can't do it, but I know somebody who can. We could use external help from this third party. Yes, it might cost a little bit of money, but it goes back, all these things are interlinked. It goes back to the relationship, back to the trust. The same kind of answer could have even been given to one of the recent questions. If you are going to do something, you should actually do it, rather than say, yes, I can do it, and then find out that you can't. It's a very, very similar question and answer to what we discussed previously, just in a different context.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks, Colin. I have 2 more questions from my offline card. So, to our live audience, do you have anything that you want to ask? You can either speak out if you wanted to, if you feel a bit shy. Well, generally Asian audience are a bit shy. So, if you're shy, you can always type it in the text box. I can bring it up. Anyone? Okay, this is more like a question for George. George, I have a lot of questions for you actually. If I can't finish it for today, I'll email it to you. All right. So one of the questions from our audience, this guy is from Singapore, so maybe it's good for your colleague. It says that, George, based on your tool, is there a governance model that defines and links operational, commercial, and strategic activities? Well, I think this is a broad topic, but if I may interpret it from the IT perspective, I think he's referring whether there's a dashboard that can link operational, commercial, and strategic activities. You want to give a short answer to that?
Yes, yes, there is. The thing is, what we try to do with Pool for Tool is to bring all of this information together. So we have strategic supplier relationship management, we have category management, which is fully strategic, but also we have supply chain execution part in the software. We have contract management in the software, and of course you can bring all of this information together to have the holistic picture.
Okay,
so,
because
to be like a sales question, I didn't want to make this a sales pitch, but yeah, this is possible to do.
Okay. Well, very good to hear. I mean, like I said, I think this question, they will probably ask you more details. I mean, what they want to know is actually a general answer. And I get another, standard question, but it could be an interesting answer that you can provide to them as a way of pitch. It says that, how do you position Pool for Tools with Ariba? Well, typical question, I say, but, well, this is your chance to pitch, I guess.
We have a complete different focus than Ariba. Ariba is very much about their supplier network, this Ariba Discovery, which is not at all our business, okay? So we do feature a supplier network, but it's always a closed supplier network, okay? As I said before, most of our clients work in manufacturing, where it's very hard to become a new supplier and to find your correct suppliers, and they have to be audited and checked and everything. So just going on a web page and searching for, give me the best injection molding supplier there is just not an option, okay? We are completely different there. Okay, so you have your own supplier network, which is a closed one, and we have very broad modules, from very strategic modules to very operative modules. So we're way deeper there. And this might sound a little bit cocky or funny to you. I know for a fact that we have better SAP integration than Ariba itself.
So that's a very good one. That's a very good one. Well, okay. Well, I think we are running 10 minutes late, so I'm kind of like wrapping up. But before that, maybe one last question from the live audience. I have more questions for you guys, but it's just that we are running a bit late. So any more questions from the live audience? Cedric, thank you. I saw your text. All right. Well, in that case, no worries. We will send you a recorded webinar after maybe in next Monday, next Tuesday, where you can look through our speakers again and hear them through again and ask questions. The contact details will be provided to get in touch with our 3 speakers for today. Again, very thanks to Colin, Edward, and George for time spending 1 hour with us at this webinar. For those people who like about this webinar and would like to hear more, our next monthly webinar will be next month. It will be something about category management. So category management, and if you like it, just follow us on LinkedIn. Go to our LinkedIn page, linkedin.com/gosourcing, or go to our website, gosourcing.com, and subscribe to our mailing list, and we'll keep it in touch. GoSourcing is a social media website for procurement people like you guys. We give you resources, best practices, and also webinars to help you to succeed at work. With that, I guess I'm concluded for today's session. Again, thanks, Colin, Edward, and George. Thanks for your time. Pleasure. Stay in touch.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah.